Breathe is a gift of you. Lord, we just ask you to lead us and guide us in proceedings here today, and that your will be done in the end. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Senator Summers, if you would like to go ahead and start with your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Dixon. I would like to start by telling you, thank you all for taking your time to come into a hearing on a nice, hot August in the middle of reconstruction in the Capitol. And I'd like to thank the members of the audience for coming. I mean, this is how we get things done. We talk about it, we work it out, we tweak it, and we try to come up with the best way, for what we're trying to lay out. So thank you all for taking your time to come up. I know some of us, like Senator Sams over here, has a long-distance drive, and some of the others may have a long-distance drive living close by just with traffic. But thank you anyway for being here. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about Senate Bill 88. When we presented Senate Bill 88 a year ago, Senate Bill 88 needed tweaking, it needs some work, and this committee, in its wisdom, saw it needed to be tabled and worked on, and I greatly appreciate that. And so we have, the new version of Senate Bill 88, we have tried to make sure that we are 100% focused on our goal. And our goal, this goal is simple. Before I get into the deep, this goal is very simple. All we're simply saying on Senate Bill 88 is, if you're going to talk gender to a child under 16 years old, you need to notify the parent or the guardian and let them understand what the curriculum is about. And we're asking the fact that anyone in loco parentis, and everyone understands that loco parentis means you're in charge of a child, whoever's in charge of a child, school, church, 4-H, it doesn't matter. Whoever's in charge of the child at that time, do not discuss gender with that child. It is not your job to discuss gender with a child. That is the parent or the guardian's position to do that, or a professional. And I want to make something else really clear. If anyone is in loco parentis, feels that this child is in danger for any reason whatsoever, that couldn't go home and talk to mom and dad or a guardian or whatever, then that person in charge of that child can refer that child to the proper authorities, counselors, et cetera, and they can talk to that child and find out what the issues are and work to help that child out. That's what this is built about, simply. Now, as you all know, there's been emails going around and texts going around and whatever. This is the Don't Say Gay bill. I would like to tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. Absolutely has nothing to do with your gender or your sexual persuasion in this bill. Zero. Absolutely. Now, I know people will argue that fact, but you cannot find it in this bill that has anything to do with that. So here's the deal. I don't want anyone talking to my grandchild about his gender and trying to persuade him to change his gender, not change his gender, all the above. I don't want him telling him that I don't want a racist person maybe teaching my child, talking to my child and talking to him about racism and trying to teach him to be a racist person. I want that to be left up to the parents or the guardian, at least till they're 16 years old, which is the age of consent in Georgia, and that way we'll move forward on these things and we'll stop all the issues that comes up. I want to say for the record, I have wonderful friends that have different sexual persuasions than I do. Wonderful friends. We have no issue. I have run this by several of them, and they'd have no issue about what I do, or what I say, what we're doing in this bill here, because it is not a Don't Say Gay bill. It is not. I understand the ones behind me think that, and they want to make fun about it, but the reality of it is I don't care if it's their children, your children, or my children. It's not the responsibility of the person in charge to teach these kids what they feel is right when it comes to gender. That's basically the crux of this bill. And if they have a problem with that, if people have a problem with that, then they truly have issues. Because the reality of it is this is a child protection bill. This is what this bill is about, child protection. Now, I can go into a lot of issues about our talking points. I can explain the bill, but in lieu of time, I'd like to start off by introducing, I got Tom Rollins over here. Tom is a constitutional lawyer who helped with the bill. He's worked with the bill. He understands what's going on. And I have Ms. Kate Hudson over on this side over here. Ms. Kate has a group that she's formulated, and she's been working with us diligently to explain what's going on in all these facilities out there, whether it be schools, charter schools, regular schools, like I said, 4-H church camps, all the above. And she's going to bring a presentation to us. And I start with Tom, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, and let Tom go in his part of it about the constitutionality of it.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm number
Here,
12.
you want to use 3?
Is that working? Yeah, actually, 12's good. I hope everybody's good this morning. I want to say, first of all, we're working with a version of this bill, as Chairman said, that is very different than the one that was introduced last year. That bill itself, even after we did the changes last year, that before it was tabled, has been completely narrowed down. It's very narrow in scope. Let me talk first about what this bill is not about. As Senator Summers said, it does not involve sex education or sexual orientation at all. Rather, it specifically addresses discussions of gender identity, and the bill itself does not take a stand on whether discussing gender identity is a good thing or a bad thing. Rather, the bill instead addresses two very specific issues at the intersections of schools' gender identity. The first involves instruction generally on gender identity issues. Now, public and charter schools are going to be required simply to create clear policies involving classroom discussions of instruction on issues of gender identity, while private schools, the ones who want to participate in GHSA or in the Special Needs Scholarship Program, need to notify parents of their intent to engage in gender identity instruction for children under 16 and give parents the option to opt out, or if parents don't respond, they opt out automatically. The second issue involves how public schools and charter schools specifically manage specific cases in which children under 16 have concerns regarding their gender identity, their desire to transition to a different gender, or they express concerns of gender dysphoria. We are simply requiring schools here to adopt clear policies on these issues so that parents can be aware of them. If the Decatur City Schools wants to adopt a policy, for example, in which students will have more privacy when they speak to a teacher or counselor regarding gender identity issues they may be involved with, nothing is stopping the school board in Decatur from doing that. But if Decatur County, down in Bainbridge, if they want to adopt a policy of notifying parents when a child expresses gender incongruence, that's up to the good people of Decatur County. So why should y'all care about this? I think the question is, why should the General Assembly be involved in this? First, I think in terms of child protection and child emotional well-being, for a child to feel a disconnect between his or her sex, biological sex, and gender identity is often emotionally painful. Although there are plenty of disagreements about the source of this pain, I think everyone agrees that that children and youth who experience gender dysphoria have much higher rates of suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts. Children with eating disorders, other mental health challenges, and autism are also represented at much higher rates among those with gender identity issues. So having a gender identity issue could be a signal of a deeper issue. Parents have a significant interest in knowing if their child is struggling with these issues so they can ensure the child is receiving appropriate treatment. Now, you'll notice in the bill, however, that nothing in the bill prohibits a school from taking steps to protect a child if there are reasonable grounds to believe that telling the parent will harm the child. And we can have the schools develop various policies on that issue with the help of the state school board. And second, although gender identity and sexual orientation are separate issues, poor handling of classroom instruction in or school counseling on these issues can result in a conflation of the two and really can cause serious damage to the child's sense of self. Studies show, and I don't think anybody disagrees with this, that many children who struggle with gender identity end up not as transgender, but as either lesbian or gay. As a writer for the Atlantic magazine recently put it, many of the gender identity curricula that are used in schools around the country right now can create confusion for the tomboy girl or the boy who prefers to play with girls. A child who doesn't fit these gender stereotypes may be led down a path into believing their gender nonconformity means they're actually stuck in the wrong body. And I've got a great quote from the Atlantic writer here. Although American society's approach to matters of gender identity is clearly still in flux, and reasonable people disagree on how best to engage students on the subject, some educators are writing progressive activist views into detailed lessons for young children. An alternative approach might be to promote inclusion in the broadest, plainest possible terms and reassure children there is no wrong way to be you. Schools should therefore take care in teaching such concepts to children and young teens without notice and making sure that parents are notified or that there are clear policies regarding parental notification of gender curricula. Finally, I would just point out that parents are concerned about this issue. A significant majority of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans are very concerned about schools that are teaching on gender issues or counseling children on gender identity issues without informing parents. In New Jersey and California right now, there is a ongoing legal battles between the state school system and the local school districts about whether or not to inform parents when a child adopts a different gender identity. But this bill, as I said, allows each local school district to adopt its own policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce Ms. Kate Hudson and let her take a few minutes.
Good morning. I'm Kate Hudson, founder of Education Veritas. I'm a Westminster alumni and mother of 3 boys. Education Veritas was born out of a need and desire for parents to be educated and empowered through truth and concrete information coming out of the private schools. We believe children are not tools or weapons to push political agendas. Instagram is the platform with where much of our content is put out. We have close to 15,000 followers from all over. And I have firsthand witnessed and continue to see within the vast majority of private schools here in Atlanta, especially the elite Christian ones, beyond comprehension what is coming out of them. I have lived with this for the past 4 years with 3 children, 14 to 19 years old. My youngest was at Westminster and the other 2 were at different private schools. I had to pull 2 of the 3 out and put them at one of the last private schools that was not pushing woke curriculum. This is traumatic for these kids. It's not just as simple as just pull them out. We are connected to thousands of parents across Georgia that are having to navigate these dark waters of indoctrination and feel 0 transparency is taking place. Parents are faced with deprogramming their kids every day and feeling trapped in a private or public school where the agenda cannot be escaped. This is a common tale from parents. Every day, I am stunned by the conversations and battles we're being forced to have over parental rights and the acute need for children to be educated in academics and truth. I'm not a politician, I'm a mom, and this hijacking of the educational system, public and private, is damaging our children. I was going to share with you some slides up here. You all have them in front of you printed, but I'll turn this so you can see as well. This is a mirror.
Is it going to work? Excuse me.
No. No,
I won't
it won't work.
Thank you.
So this is a fraction of the accounts that we have been given from all private schools, all divisions from pre-K through 12th grade. This will give you a little bit of insight into what's transpiring within the private schools. So, and then I will follow up these slides with a summary of what's taking place. So here is a slide regarding what the Lovett School in Atlanta feels about the job you're doing and the bills that you're sending down, and that they are pushing off, what you're doing and brainwashing faculty and students as a poor job. And these are all in front of you. This all started at Westminster, where the chaplain was directing 5 to 10-year-olds to please stand if they identified as a girl, stand if they identified as a boy. Westminster's 6th grade admissions prompt for their essay was regarding a transgender child and their elementary school experience and the valuable lessons that we can all learn to better support the transgender community. This was for 10 to 11-year-olds. The next slides are from St. Martin's School. This is a 7th grade handout for the middle school, and this handout was shared with all the students, and then it was taken up after class to keep out of parents' eyes. So these next few slides are the excerpts, the 4 pages from that handout. And just a few blips from it. It says, researchers say there's 5 to 7 sexes. 1.7% have sexual differentiation. So in essence, aligning conditions that people are born with as being a common sexual differentiation as opposed to just a common, sexual difference. This notion of assigned sex at birth is obviously absurd, and children are born a boy or a girl, but there's a continual hammering of a doctor is looking at a child and determining whether they're a boy or a girl. This is, next slide's from the Holy Innocents Episcopal School. Their religion class, the teacher came in and said that we're no longer going to say, hey guys, you're all going to say, hey y'all, and I want you to practice this. Right now we're going to all say it together, hey y'all, because that's not an inclusive statement. And not everyone identifies in that way. The next few slides are...
Hold on one second.
Yeah.
We've got a full room here. When anyone is at the podium speaking, we're going to respect them. We're not going to allow any outbursts. Just want to make that very clear. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So the next few slides are from a Lovett Day of Silence panel that they had, a drag queen who came in, and 3 other members of their alumni that came in and did a presentation for the students there. And with these, it's just illustrating what they were basically telling the students, faculty, and any parents that were there. Lovett is denying biological science and truth. It says medical professionals label a baby when it's born. They go into gender identity slide, a person's internal sense of their gender, and then goes through non-binary, transgender, woman, girl, man, boy. Gender expression, sexual orientation, where it reads, sexual orientation evolves through a multi-stage developmental process and may change over time. It is on a continuum and not a set of absolute categories. They then go into personal pronouns, using names and corrective gendering and correctly gendering someone. The next slide is from the Westminster Schools. This is regarding their CARE program, where they said each child will increasingly recognize unfairness, have language to describe unfairness, and understand unfairness hurts. Each child will demonstrate empowerment and the skills to act with others or act alone against prejudice and or discriminatory action, which none of this was going on within the schools. And there was no massive instances of this type of behavior. The next slide is the drag queen that came to Lovett, Eve Swallows. This is a, quote, Christian school, and this was on his open Instagram account, this picture, which all of the students, of course, pulled up who this person was and were watching his videos and performances. The next slide is another one out of Westminster, where it's bottom line showing the level of indoctrination going on there, where they have bigot on a 10-year-old's spelling vocabulary list, and where they direct the kids to get these definitions is dictionary.com, where the definition was not every bigot is a conservative and not every conservative is a bigot. Below that are other examples to follow along with that in commentary. Happy to see Limbaugh dead. Very inclusive. The next slide is of the genderbread person, which is within a huge auditorium assembly area where middle school, high school frequent. The genderbread man is a national figure at this point. It hung in the foyer where all kids could check out this other example, I guess. Not unlike the unicorn that's been traveling around. Here's the library at Westminster where they're handing out stickers, they, them, all pronouns deserve a great haircut. This book here, It Feels Good to Be Yourself, is out of Trinity School, which is for 3-year-olds up to 6th grade. These are some excerpts out of the book regarding discussions of non-binary, how kids can feel, like a boy or a girl. Another slide from that. The next one is from the Westminster Schools. It is a gender survey which students crafted and gave to their grade. This is normally one of the big pillars of this indoctrination effort in building the programs to implement. So normally this is done by the school or other organizations, but here we have students sending out gender equality questioning regarding advantages or disadvantages of being the sex that they are. This next slide is from a parent who left the Lovett School and listed to the school and their form all their concerns. One, why was the orchestra teacher explaining non-binary concepts to 5th graders with examples of how one can choose their gender in a fluid spectrum? This is not relevant to grooming and other organizations. Why is a 5th grade teacher discussing her sister's sexuality with her students? Why does a 5th grade teacher correct a student commenting on a wedding, making the couple Mr. and Mrs., pointing out that to her it is Dr. and Mr.? Why does the religion teacher explain what sex is to 3rd graders from an Old Testament story to discussion? Why are the history teachers teaching judgment of history rather than what the facts were? So here is another slide from Woodward Academy, another one of their outdoor club gatherings, sexuality being front and center again. The next slide is from Mill Springs Academy. This is a smaller school north of here, about their LGBT acceptance club. And then this has been our message all along: teach kids how to think and not what to think. So in summary of what all of this is, the weaponization of the language is purposeful and designed to confuse parents and children. This pushback has nothing to do with the LGBTQ community or an adult's sexual preference, as long as it doesn't involve children. The irony is the push is only hurting the LGBTQ community. Children and teens whose minds and bodies are not fully developed, being constantly barraged with sexual content, conversations, and political propaganda is damaging. Our children have a God-given right to an education free from these indoctrinations. This is not about a few egregious schools or rogue administrators and teachers. This is calculated, coordinated, multi-pronged effort to break down and destroy our society at the expense of our children. So, queer theory dismantles traditional assumptions about gender and sexual identities, as well as biology and human creation. It explores the oppressive power of dominant norms, especially those of sexuality. Why is it not okay for some boys to just be more feminine and some girls more masculine? Why do children who don't fit a stereotype need to all of a sudden be swept up into confusion and distress by telling them, maybe you should identify as the opposite sex? I was a total tomboy that spent my afternoons climbing a muddy hill in our backyard, looking for the best sticks and rocks, and hating to wear the dresses my mother put me in. Had my mother labeled that behavior or told me something was wrong with how God made me, I would have been devastated and traumatized and perhaps lured down a path that would have confused or caused distress. The gay community has been hijacked, and countless are speaking out against this sexualization of children as well. The youth that are falling prey to this agenda are being used to destabilize society. Like communism, they'll be discarded when the goal is reached. Children do not need this sexualized narrative pushed on them, confusing them about their biology. is a surefire way to cause tremendous anxiety, depression, and further insecurities. It's no surprise mental illness is skyrocketing in our youth. Most of you probably have children, and you know what a struggle the teen years are. Adults have jumped in and introduced drag queen story time adult entertainment, curriculum with sexuality and gender ideology at the center, as well as the queering of the catalog, according to self-proclaimed Marxist lesbian head of the American Library Association, which Texas and Montana just defunded. The language of empathy, belonging, and inclusion is an effort to package something truly diabolical to appear positive and virtuous. Children's constitutional rights are being violated, and it is being allowed. Let me ask you, if you came up to a coworker and shared about your sexuality, pictures, or content from a book like Genderqueer or This Book is Gay, what would happen? If you engaged with your interns about gay or straight sexual acts, or pressure them to engage in conversations around sexuality, how fast do you think human resources would be called? And the likelihood of you losing your job or getting serious repercussions? Pretty likely. This is what's going on in our schools, but this is not only being allowed, it is being encouraged. The words hostile, harassment, and intimidation come to mind. These are words that need to be directed at these schools, administrators, teachers, and organizations coming for our children under the guise of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. This effort to indoctrinate students has nothing to do with kindness, including others, or belonging. It is an intentional effort to dismantle society and brainwash our youth through queer theory and political ideologies. This is the easiest path to transformation and destabilization. Division between parents and children is also not only being allowed, but encouraged. Political power, money, is the greatest of motivators for many, and this agenda is being executed at the expense of children. There are leagues of organizations tied to this effort and feeding into the public and private schools. The Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, Spectrum, Carney Sando, which is the hiring firm that plucks the most woke candidates from a pool of applicants, the American Library Association, again just defunded in Texas and Montana, Planned Parenthood, the Walton, Ford, and Rockefeller Foundations, the Trans Student Educational Resource, which brought the country the gender unicorn, not unlike the genderbread man, as well as countless others feeding or funding progressive content in our schools. Leadership is bringing order to chaos. What we are in is a perversion of leadership. Heads of schools, Senate, House representatives, and state leaders have a responsibility to our children, not adults pushing agendas. The mental and physical health and safety need to be a priority. This truly isn't and should not be a partisan issue. Leading innocent children down a path of woke ideologies when their minds are not fully developed is abuse. We do not have a mass contagion of truly gender dysphoric children and teens. We have a mass contagion of educators, adults, our government and organizations pushing this content into our public and private schools. Our children have fallen way behind in reading and math and deserve better. The diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, and justice agenda is destroying this country, education, and society. Those individual words mean one thing, the political effort quite another. It is imperative we protect children in private schools. The attack on them is more coordinated and methodical for obvious reasons of resources. Some of these private schools have endowments nearing $400 million. They have accrediting organizations like the National Association of Independent Schools and the Southern Association of Independent Schools masterminding and implementing this effort. You must implore the legislators to protect the over 157,000 students in Georgia's private schools. Your protection of them, or decision not to, will have profound consequences on our next generation of leaders and the nation in general. The protection should follow the child wherever they go from this indoctrination and brainwashing. Private school parents have zero options in the metro area as it's completely eaten up with this cancer. If parents try to speak out, they are shut down, punished, and ostracized. Unless the General Assembly votes to protect children, no one can help them. These private schools are getting subsidies from our government. They're not subject to property or income tax, so no matter public or private, all children need protections, and you are the last line of defense. You have watched us fight an uphill battle tirelessly, and now we need you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Ms. Hudson, thank you. Tom, thank you. Mr. Baghdad. Mr. Chairman, let me just, before you turn it over for questions, just let me reiterate and get to the crux of the matter. And I hope she explained it extremely well. This is simply about the protection of children under the age of 16, young people, young adults, whatever you want to call them. This has nothing to do with a political agenda. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's not your sexual persuasion or your orientation. It is simply that children this needs to be handled by professionals, not by someone who's hired to teach them math, science, arithmetic, whatever you want to talk about. That's not their job to orientate those children into what their beliefs are when it comes to sexual preference. Thank you for letting me have this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so
We'll-
much.
We'll answer questions.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Halpern.
Thank you. I am going to ask you to forgive me because I got lost. So we started off saying that this is a bill only about gender, but in the discussions, it went completely to other places because I heard sexualization of children, which you said was specifically not in the bill. I heard injustice, I heard bigot, I heard DEI is destroying our country, and so I got lost. At the end of the day, let me just say, I've sat on a board and I've chaired a board of a private school here in Atlanta, and the reality is that sitting on that board, we actually had to understand and come to the recognition and the realization that there were children in our school community who were transgender children. We were accepting children into our school community who were transgender. We had students who were transitioning, and this was an elementary school, just elementary, not a high school. And so as a member of the board, we had to come to the recognition that this is something that was happening, and we could either ignore it and not protect the students in our care, or we could figure out a way to make sure that the parents and those children were able to be in the school community and not be completely ostracized. This is why I'm going to bring up the word belonging, because belonging really is part of social emotional learning. And so I think I'm taking umbrage a little bit with the idea that the teacher's job is only to teach arithmetic. And don't get me wrong, now we need to do this well. They do need to teach kids how to read. They do need to teach kids how to do math. But are we no longer in agreement that teachers are also helping to teach our kids belonging and social emotional experience and reasoning? I mean, isn't it true that we all have a favorite teacher that we can tell their name decades and decades later because of how that teacher made us feel and how that teacher accepted us for who we are? And so I'm confused because I don't feel like this bill is actually meaning to protect children. And I don't think it centers students at all. We really didn't talk about students and the children yet. And they also have agency, do they not? I get where parents adults tend to be a whole lot less accepting than children. I sat on that board and saw and experienced myself of a child who was transitioning from a young girl to a boy, wanted to be called something different. A decision was made with the family about making sure that everybody in that classroom knew. And the teacher sat down and the child sat down with their classmates who had a conversation, and all those kids were like, great, you want to be called Melissa? You're going to be called Melissa now. No big deal. And I feel like we're making a bigger deal out of some of these things than we need to. And don't get me wrong, I agree, parents should be making choices. I'm not taking my children, for example, to drag time reading hours. That's not for me in my family. I get where some of the hesitancy comes from. But I am wondering, again, the question really is, how then do you create a community of inclusion and a community of a belonging if you refuse to talk about any of the things that are actually happening in other children's life? How do we create children who can go out into the world, which is well beyond the four walls of their home and their parents, and be able to deal with the larger world when it comes time for them to? Because aren't we preparing our forget K through 12, because you said children under 16, so let's just say K through 8th grade, 9th grade, whatever. Aren't we really looking at our kindergarteners today and not just saying, how do we get you through kindergarten, but aren't we saying, how do we get you to the time that you're 18 and going out into the world, or 18 and going off to college? Isn't that really the job of our schools?
Senator Halpern, in your comments, yes, absolutely, I understand what you're coming from, but you answered the question perfectly. You said with the parents' involvement. And that's all we're saying here, is with the parents' involvement or guardian.
So then, follow-up. So we just had an experience here in Cobb County where a teacher, because of a law that we passed, was fired. And it was a parent who brought up the complaint, and then the school board decided to fire that teacher. The tribunal decided that that was not the recommendation. The school board did it anyway. So then my question is, then how do you ascribe the rights of a parent over the rights of many other parents? Then which parent gets to call the shots?
In that issue, I would suggest, and I don't know the entire issue about that firing, but I would suggest that this bill perhaps would protect the teacher also if they're not talking to the kid about gender, and they're allowing the professional in the school to do so.
But they are the professional in the school.
They're professional. They're professionals in their area, ma'am. They're in their area.
One last follow-up, and then I'll
Yes, ma'am.
cede to other people. Aren't our teachers professionally trained? And aren't they professionally trained? Aren't they given some training? This is a legit question. Aren't they given some training outside of just, I'm the math teacher, all I know is math?
Well, in that case, I would suggest, and Tom, you're welcome to talk, I would suggest if that teacher had had that training, she wouldn't have been fired. I'm assuming so.
No, I think it's the laws that I think the implications of what we do in this room and obviously in our chamber and what we pass and what the governor signs has larger implications.
Please, Tom.
Senator, number 12.
12.
I completely understand where you're coming from. I think the difference is that so for example, in your situation, a very free-thinking school
Yes.
in which people are encouraged to have different ideas. What Ms. Hudson has described, what we've seen around the country to some extent, is specific gender curricula being taught. And again, this bill does two things. Number one, it simply allows, if a parent is in a private school, if they, for example, biologically, they may be atheists who believe in biology and who do not want their children being taught that sex is on a spectrum, then they can opt out. And to the Cobb County situation, for example, I do believe that had we had specific policies in that school about what would be taught when regarding gender issues, that number one, that teacher may have, she said she didn't understand the book was about gender. That was her claim. The other thing, of course, is that I don't think necessarily a teacher, I really do not think, and this is coming from my professional background, I don't think a teacher is equipped to talk to a child about gender dysphoria, period. And if if a teacher, if, this is one of the things that I would like to see in the statewide policies, for example, that if a child approaches a public school teacher about feeling some gender dysphoria, feeling some discomfort in his or her own body, I don't want them saying, oh, well, let me tell you about the gender spectrum. Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you that if you feel like a girl and you're a male, that you can be a girl. And to quote the WABE, one of the people the other day, the child said, I looked up and I realized that I don't have to be a dad. I can be a mom. Well, I'm sorry, but if you go down the gender transition road, you're going into social transition, then you're going into puberty blockers, and you're going into hormones, and eventually across gender surgery, which puts the child on a track to have a lifetime of medical treatment required to maintain the alternate gender identity. And so I believe that teachers aren't equipped to deal with those issues, but yet instead they should be, for example, referred to a school counselor. And I do believe that unless those situations, and you know they exist, if my child comes home and says they're transgender, I'm going to beat their butt, okay? We don't want that. We don't want that to happen, okay? We need to protect children who are in that situation. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that that parents, to the extent possible, are involved in these very, very life-changing identity issues.
On the curriculum issue, though, isn't it true, though, that right now parents have the right and opportunity to opt their children out of certain curriculum? So, like in the case, I mean, like,
Yeah,
I
well,
know what
sex
case you're
ed.
talking about.
Yeah, you're talking about two different bills.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking about curriculum, and you're talking about, if a
Well, so
child's
there,
experiencing
on the public
two
school
different-
side, they can opt out, as I understand, on sex ed.
Right.
This bill actually in public schools doesn't address that. It just says let's have policies on it.
Set policies.
But on the private school, we do believe, based upon the experiences of a lot of parents, especially in the metro Atlanta, especially with the more elite schools, that the bargaining power between the parent and the school is so lopsided that the parents don't really have the option to say, I don't want this non-biological, what they say, I believe, to be non-scientific. I don't want this being taught to my child. But they don't have the option to opt out. So in private schools, we're trying to give them that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. Good to see everybody. It's been a few months. I want to just follow up and start with the private schools. I mean, it seems like the big picture here is discomfort in, obviously a substantial portion of society with broader acceptance of gay individuals who don't subscribe. And by the way, there are plenty of scientists and child developmental doctors who will disagree with, I think, some of the testimony put forth that there is only biological gender. So, there is first getting into, biological sex, having to dictate all of that. There are plenty of experts and doctors out there who will firmly disagree with that. So we have to assess ourselves. We can't, in my opinion, be picking one set of, well, we're just going to go with this because we kind of don't like it, when there are plenty of credentialed individuals who offer us something different. So the discomfort comes from these changing social mores, and that's something that I certainly understand. But getting more specifically into a few things that have been raised today, I feel like when it comes to the private schools, parents have a choice, do they not, as to whether or not they want to spend $30,000 to $40,000 to send their children to basically all of the schools that were illustrated. I mean, this is not something that the government is foisting upon these parents. And I'm not sure at all, first of all, that it's an appropriate role for us to say that those schools can't do that, because they are private schools by definition. And I would assume that the viewpoints shared today are simply not the majority of the viewpoints of the people who are attending those schools. They're just not the majority. And, in trying to force them into a different way of engaging with their parents and engaging with their children, isn't that in and of itself of political indoctrination? Who gets to decide what counts as political indoctrination? You may think it's this. Someone else may say, if that sort of thing can't be engaged with within my school, then the state has foisted political indoctrination onto our families with an opposite viewpoint.
Thank you, Senator. Two things to your question, and I understand where you're coming from. Two things. Simply this. If a private school takes money of any form or fashion in regard of taxpayers' money, they would be affected. A school that absolutely takes nothing from I'm assuming, any kind of form of Gold Star, taxpayer, any kind of function, doesn't participate with GHSA or any of that kind of stuff, they're on their own. I mean, we would have no jurisdiction in that level with that school. So yes, you're exactly right on that. In regards to the other part of it, Senator, it goes back to the crux of the bill. Simply involve the parents. Allow them the ability to say, we want our children involved or we don't want our children involved. That's all. That's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Yes, okay, thank you, Senator, and let me just follow up with that. So in the, and Senator Halpern raised this already, in the example where, due to partially changing social mores and broader acceptance of a viewpoint that some children are indeed transgender or feel that their gender identity is incongruent with their biological sex, and their parents are on a journey with them through it, and the parents are involved, and they are, as a family, making certain choices, and the child presents at school, either private or public. How is that school supposed to handle it? I mean, how can you say there can be, my point is, I do not believe it is possible or advisable to shut down any discussion of those things, such things, when they are going to present themselves in our children's lives. There's simply no way to decree that such things will not be discussed at all. And you might not like it, but it just is. It is what it is. My son's class has a transgender child. I'm not sure there's been any discussion of it. In fact, the only reason I know that the child is transgender is because the family came down to lobby against the last bill we passed. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. I don't think the kids know. It's just not that big a deal. But were everyone to find out, and my son raised a question about it, well, what are those teachers supposed to say? I mean, you put them in an impossible bind.
So I would just respond that 12. To the extent that you're in a private school, it's not a question of not teaching about, it's not, this is all about, the private school only deals with teaching a formal gender curriculum, okay, first of all, and allows parents to opt out of that formal gender curriculum, which a parent should be allowed to do. So for example, a parent who believes that there is a biological binary, who doesn't want their child being in 5th grade, for example, being taught that sex is on a spectrum, that parent might be able to opt out. The other issue, of course, is that the school, especially the public schools, are going to be required to have policies about how to deal with this. The examples you've used all involve parents who were on board with their child's gender identity, who were involved with the school in discussing their child's gender identity. Unfortunately, there are a lot of cases lately, especially there are specific policies in New Jersey and California, I think Minnesota, New York, a few other states, in which schools are prohibited from telling parents about a change in their child's gender identity, and that is what we are trying to address with this.
Yes, and I understand that, Tom, and that seems a lot more reasonable than most of the testimony that was presented today. The fact of the matter is, most of these things, not only are they from private schools where parents pay upwards of $37,000 per child to attend them, they are not dealing with the situation that you are claiming this bill is about. They're we've got, are we against Mill Springs Academy having a LGBT acceptance club? Like, is that outlawed? The claim was made, or the testimony was, that this doesn't deal with gay children, and that we're concerned about these gender identity discussions. This gingerbread it says it was posted on the wall. I mean, would that, under this bill, be disallowed? That it's not a curriculum, right? And if my son said to their teacher, oh, wow, I just found out that my friend is transgender and was born another sex, I take it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that my son's teacher would be able to talk to my son about that, but they would not be able to present a curriculum without.
No,
So can you address these
they can still
examples for
present a
me?
curriculum. They can absolutely present the curriculum. Let's say, for example.
But without the assent of
Right.
the parents.
No, well, the parent can opt out, one parent. So you can have your one child whose parents are completely opposed to this. They may be for religious grounds. It may be for biological science grounds. It may be the fact that they have a male child who likes to play with dolls, is, more feminine, and they don't want the child getting the wrong idea that he can be a feminine boy. And so that family may want to opt out of a curriculum that teaches that sex is on a spectrum, that if you feel feminine but you're a male, then you may want to consider becoming transgender or non-binary. And that's the
Thank you.
real issue we're
We've
dealing
got
with.
a few other questions up here. Senator Settler?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So, lady, thanks for being here. Thanks for your presentation. What I wrestled with in this is, I mean, when I look at this content you shared, a person that's got some of this content and their identity is Eve Swallows. One might ask, it brings lots of questions. What's the concern? What is the sense in parents that's holding them at the schools? You mentioned Trinity, Mill Springs, Lovett, Westminster, St. Martin's, Holy Innocents, Woodward, maybe others. Maybe I missed some. What is it that's holding parents at these schools when this kind of content is being shared with their kids?
Right.
The parents don't just dust off their feet and say, you know what? Having BDSM symbols shared with my kids and Eve Swallows, I mean, is a mockery of the. We're done with you.
Right.
Have your school, show balls and chains to kids with people, and teach this in your schools. Do your thing. We're gone.
Right.
What is it that's? I mean, and I'm not firing at you here. I'm just
No, I
asking,
got it.
just for. Why wouldn't parents just say, you know what? I'm done with you. Never again am I going to give you one penny of my money. You guys, I mean, and all that parents would want to say, well, why don't folks leave? Why is this an issue that we as a legislature have to come in and impose in statute requirements of private schools, when common sense would tell me the parents would get together, they'd post this on social media, they'd make sure there's no lack of understanding that would-be parents whose kids are, in Lovett, and they're going to get their interview before they get in kindergarten. They're hoping beyond hope, maybe my kid gets accepted, so they could start their 13-year journey at this elite school or other elite schools.
Right.
That, hey, understand what you're buying, Mom and Dad. You're buying Eve Swallows.
Right.
Why isn't that enough? Why do we need to act as a legislature to address this?
So I think the parents have come into these schools under the guise that they're buying something else. They're getting what their mission states. And you have the schools changing their missions and language to fit an agenda. So where all of this has been shared with parents for the past 4 years, this content. And there has been tremendous changes as far as people removing, millions of dollars, pledges that have been made, contributions, removing them from their estate planning.
Yeah.
Some have pulled their kids, but others have maybe, a ninth grader and a junior. And it's like, well, to pull them at this point when all of this has just come out is tough, obviously. And it's, kids have their friends and their groups, and, they're comfortable in their school as far as this is where they've been for a number of years. And as well, I think for the parents, it takes tremendous blood, sweat, and tears getting these kids into these schools that they deem to be the pinnacle, which they're not. And we've seen that. So where you have Westminster Lovett, for example, saying we're now an inclusive Christian school, I mean, it's you don't redefine Christianity. So there's nothing wrong with including people, belonging, all of that, those words in themselves, that goes without saying.
So, Mr. Chairman, what I'm trying to get at here, my starting point is, there's no way this legislature should ever, let me finish my sentence. There's no way this legislature should ever dictate things to private schools beyond the very minimum, which says, 4.5 hours of teaching and these base core subjects to be accredited and so forth. That's my starting point. What I'm trying to understand, though, is what you're saying is, if you accept the premise we should never dictate things in private schools, which is certainly my starting point. I think it's high-minded to not regulate things. What I'm hearing you say is two things. First, there's a property interest in kids being in a school. If you unpack, scholarship opportunities, NCA, the whole name, image, and likeness, the whole idea when you think about even access to getting into elite schools and the whole affirmative action stuff that went before the courts, there is a property interest that's been raised before that's tied to certain schools. Now, I don't know that the property interest is strong enough, but I'm just trying to understand and at least be clear about what you're saying. You believe there's a property interest that parents have.
It's a social, the social piece of it, where they feel they're in this great elite school and it feels so good to be a part of this. I think a lot of parents have a tough time separating themselves from that and saying, what's best for my child's heart, mind, spirit. So, and there's not a ton of options, as we point out. I mean, there's probably two that we know of that have said we're not teaching this type of curriculum. This is what we're putting out.
So, because you think about this, and I'm just trying to unpack this. And what in essence you're saying, there's a property interest, whether it's the social cohesion your kids have by being there, this perceived value of the name of the school, and then if they've made commitments to the foundation under the belief that it's a little O, it teaches historical Christianity, but yet they're doing something different. There's this differential. Are you saying there's a fraud? I guess what I'm asking is there a fraud here? And because I don't know that we have an interest in doing what this bill does. I'm not really convinced we need to do this. But what I'm trying to understand is there a fraud that's being perpetrated? You're saying one thing, but you're delivering another. And is there a property interest that's strong enough that tied to this fraud, this scheme, this deception scheme, is enough to make the legislature jump in and want to actually enforce in statute what a private school shall do? I mean, to me, that's a pretty high bar you got to clear there. I'm not sure I'm there yet. Because to me, parents ought to say, you know what, I'm dusting off my feet. These places, they're a lie. They got me in under a lie. They said they teach this, and they're teaching that. Heck, other parents may choose the schools because they want this taught. Right. We're in a free society. If you want this taught, go to these schools. Do it.
Right. There's no transparency on some of that. That's some of the problems.
So what I'm hearing you say is there's a fraud of some kind. There's a lie that's emerged that's tied to some property interest. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, if I can just add to that, you got to remember, let's say I send my child to an elite school for the first 4 years, and then they introduce a curriculum on an issue with which I vehemently disagree, and I think it's wrong for my family. So you're putting me in the odd position of either having to destroy my child's friendships, yank my child out of the school, the only school he or she has known, and put them somewhere else, when the easier role would be to make sure that that school, if it is receiving state funds, offers a parent the opportunity to opt out of one class for their child.
Because Mr. Chairman, I know we have limitations on time. I'm just concerned, watch out what you ask for. We start tying state funds to these kinds of things. What's the next bill this committee is going to contemplate tying state funds? What's the next issue that state funds are going to get tied to? With the shekels come the shackles. My goal is to unshackle private schools and let them do their thing. This is, to me, another hook in private schools telling what they shall and shall not do by the wisdom of this General Assembly. And I don't know that I trust myself or anybody in this panel to decide what's best for schools. Private schools beyond a real basic sort of reading, writing, arithmetic kind of thing. So I'm just telling the author, what I'm wrestling with is, why should we put a requirement on schools when we ought to be lifting requirements off of schools? Particularly when parents have the resources to leave. If they've got the ability to stroke a check to go to Westminster, they've got the ability they have the civic capacity there to make other choices. So Mr. Chairman, I know this is a hearing only, I'm sharing where I'm at today. You got to clear a bar of why we're going to put a requirement on a private school when parents can say, you know what, this place is a bunch of liars. They suckered me in saying they were this and they're doing this, then leave. Other parents who like the philosophy, let them come and be part of the school. So that's where I'm at, Mr. Chairman, and I'm trying to weigh this out because we have to clear a pretty high bar to put extra requirements on private schools.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Eccles? Oh, you're good, okay. We'll move on to hearing from the audience, from testimony, from speakers that have signed up. First speaker is Brian Nunez. And then also, we are limited on time today. This is a hearing only. There will be further hearings. I want to let folks know that. We're going to hold everybody to 2 minutes. And then also, I know we've got over 40 speakers signed up. If someone goes before you and they say, the same thing, if I get to you and you'd rather pass, that would be great to keep things moving along. Or if there's a group of you here together, there may not be, but if there is, elect one speaker and you can have the other folks with you stand up, just so we know you're there. And we've got a list, and everybody on the committee knows that there's a lot of folks in opposition to this bill. So thank you. Please go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Brian Nunez, and I'm the Georgia Policy Associate for the SPLC Action Fund. We are dedicated to safeguarding the civil and human rights of all people. The bill adds another layer of legal responsibility for educators and school personnel who, although untrained, are required to report a child's expression of gender dysphoria to their parents. This puts school administrators in the position of outing students who are in dangerous home situations, possibly putting them in the face of abusive or hostile parents. This legislation would essentially prevent young teens struggling from seeking any advice from trusted adults in their lives. This is a recipe for youth suicide. Suicide rates among transgender youth are significantly higher than their peers. Requiring a math teacher or coach who may be the child's only trusted adult mentor to violate the child's trust could have devastating consequences. In fact, at least 4 transgender youth attempted suicide following a similar bill passage in Arkansas. This legislation is a solution in search of a problem. Kids are not being made trans by schools. Schools that have policies which recognize that the civil rights of trans kids are following federal law, and any attempt to interfere in those rights might put a school at odds with federal statutes and the Constitution. Schools that recognize the humanity of trans kids by affirming their identities are not creating other trans kids and shouldn't be penalized for putting the well-being of kids ahead of those who attack with debunked pseudoscience one of the most vulnerable populations in the countries for political capital. These kids don't wear red or blue jerseys. They simply want a shirt that says me. Rather than imposing artificial barriers to helping LGBTQ youth because of inaccurate sex stereotypes and prejudice, we should be providing age-appropriate resources for students who are struggling. This legislation communicates to our LGBT kids that will rather harm them than help them. Let me just finish this one last sentence. This committee should not express to our LGBT kids in the state that your priorities are to harm them than to rather help them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Mel Kuttner. And then the next speaker after that is Cindy Battles.
Good morning, committee. My name is Mel Kuttner, and I'm here from the Deep Center in Savannah, Georgia. So I was up at 3:30 in the morning to get here. I'm glad I made it. We are a community-based organization focused on youth leadership through civic education. We focus on developing community-driven, pragmatic, but hopeful visions of what schools could look like and achieve for all students. I just want to share with you some of the things we've heard from teachers and students this summer. They want stronger connections between schools, farmers, and the ecosystem. They want better instruction on finance and media literacy. And they want opportunities to build meaningful relationships with other educators and students in the schools so they can meet their academic needs. More importantly, sorry, I am not a lobbyist, so I'm a little bit nervous.
You're doing a great job.
Yeah. More importantly, one thing that they said is they want to feel respected and valued by decision makers. They want their voices heard. And I think this point is really important for Georgia and for this bill. This is a point that we heard across the state, across geography and political party, and we heard it in a 2015 report and a 2022 report that explored the importance of teacher retention and burnout in Georgia schools. The current superintendent named it as one of the most pressing issues that are challenging our times. Bills like SB 88 are part of the problem of teacher burnout and retention. From the 50 educators and students we heard from local private and public schools in Savannah, not in New Jersey or Minnesota or Texas, they, and including teachers that have made a point to self-identify and want me to tell you that, they lean politically conservative. They find this bill demoralizing, disrespectful, and disconnected to the realities and critical thinking capacities of young people and educators, many of whom, by the way, are parents. It's not educators versus parents. I'll be really fast. So at the Deep Center, we will continue to show up and advocate against bills like this when we hear from our educators and our young people about the impact that they'll have. And when the bills are authored, when the bill's authors introduce them and that likens conversations about gender identity to racial indoctrination, or when a legislative body that recently, in the last 2 years, in the last 30 minutes of legislative session, tracked on an anti-trans sports bill to a so-called divisive concepts bill, we just, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. All that said, we'd rather be here and bring our young people and educators here to have pragmatic but hopeful conversations, bipartisan conversations. We'd love to bring young people and talk with Senator Payne about school discipline tribunals. Our problems that our young people are facing are bipartisan. We don't have to let policy be reduced or subsumed by a few fringe parents and partisan talking points.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cindy Battles, and then next up is Reverend L.S. Allen.
Reverend Allen can't be here. Reverend Allen is in D.C.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to let you know. Hi, my name is Cindy Battles, and I am the Director of Policy and Engagement for the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And I came here to talk to y'all today as a parent, as a queer parent of a queer child. I was going to beg you to hear me when I said that even with an accepting mother, my child depended on her teachers and their support to literally save her life. But I'm also going to be really honest, because despite what the sponsor of the bill has said, I've listened to the presenter and Mr. Rollins, who would beat their child for being transgender. And no, I did not. I did not.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
So
We're going to keep quorum here. Like I said, we're on a tight schedule.
what I heard was if my child came home and said, I am transgender, I would beat their butt. So let me finish and then you can clarify. We have sat here and listened to examples that have exempted queer children and made them feel unwelcome. And I want to apologize to the people in this room who have felt that way. I want to remind y'all again that my child relied on teachers and staff at schools to feel supported as she addressed who she is as a person. I want to remind y'all that I recognize that you have some sort of polling that shows there's 80% support, but that poll didn't ask, hey, should we focus on this or should we focus on maternity rates or income inequity or any of those things? It was literally, how can we come for the LGBTQ community in a way that you will support it? And this was what y'all chose. there are other things. If we want to protect kids, I got a good idea. Let's do a quick Google search on how many children are going to church and being sexually assaulted by church leaders, and let's present legislation to protect them. This bill does not protect children. It ostracizes an already at-risk community of kids. Thank you.
We got Francesca Raul. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And then on deck is Jeff Graham.
All right. Hi, my name is Francesca Rue, and I'm here as a student volunteering my experience and testimony to this committee today. So good morning to the committee. I'm a second-year student at Georgia State, and I spent 12 years growing up in Atlanta Public Schools. And from my experience, I can tell you that students are real people. They have their own lives, they have their own questions about the world, and they have their own experiences and identities to deal with. To float this bill treating minors as anything other than human beings with complex identities, some of which will inevitably not be the gender assigned to them at birth, is a disgrace. Right now, there's valuable education legislation going through this building. Teachers need better pay and more respect by this body and this committee. Students need counselors as students need counselors as schools are more overwhelmed than ever. Last year, something life-changing happened when the Hope Scholarship got expanded, and my tuition and many other Georgian kids' tuition was expanded to 100% coverage. There is valuable legislation, so let's focus on something worth our time, please, instead of fear-mongering on a non-issue. The watered-down nature of this bill still puts a target on the back of a very vulnerable demographic of kids. The sponsor of this bill, Cardin Summers, said last year, after the passage of the anti-trans bill, Senate Bill 140, which just got struck down in an injunction, by the way, that he was done passing this type of bigoted, hateful legislation. Senate Bill 140 was just struck down by a judge as unconstitutional until further ruling. And now Senator Summers is back with the same shtick. This is transparent and it's embarrassing. I urge the committee to consider this bill unfavorably. Thank you.
Next up is Jeff Graham, and then on deck is Zena Mohammed.
I want to thank members of the committee for your continued work on this bill. Senator Summers, I know that you've worked hard on this to address many of the concerns that were brought before. Unfortunately, there are still so many issues within this legislation, and it compels me to stand up here on behalf of Georgia Equality, the 425,000 members of the LGBTQ community throughout the state of Georgia that we represent, and the millions of friends, families, and allies of LGBTQ Georgians that are affected by legislation like this. There will be others that will talk about the challenges presented by the vague language, the administrative burden that it presents upon educators, but my greatest concern is that there is no reason to single out the topic of gender identity for specific policy, rules, or regulation. There has always been and always will be students who identify as transgender or whose own sense of gender identity doesn't fit neatly into a specific binary box. This legislation will only add to the stigma they face and make their lives more challenging and difficult. These debates distract from the important work that this body has done and continues to do to address the mental health needs of Georgians of all ages. In a Trevor Project poll released in January of this year, 71% of LGBTQ youth, including 86% of transgender and non-binary youth, said state laws restricting the rights of LGBTQ young people have negatively impacted their mental health. A majority of those trans youth, 55%, said it impacted their mental health very negatively. Opposing these harmful pieces of legislation is a necessary component of suicide prevention. The introduction of bill after bill targeting members of the LGBT community for special scrutiny is also having a dangerous ripple effect. This past weekend, a 66-year-old mother of 9 was shot and killed outside of her business for displaying a pride flag. While that incident didn't happen here in Georgia, it is the product of the fact that nearly 600 anti-LGBT bills have been introduced around the country in 2023. Over half a dozen have been introduced here in Georgia. And while this level of violence last month, we saw Nazis protesting in Macon and in Cobb County, and that same group of Nazis hung an effigy of someone draped in a pride flag and is believed to have distributed hundreds, if not thousands, of anti-trans and anti-Semitic literature in communities and neighborhoods throughout the metro Atlanta area. These are the issues that we should be concerned about,
Thank you for your
not
testimony.
perpetuating the stigma against already vulnerable youth. Thank you.
We got Zena Mohammed. Okay, thank you. Then we got Kaylee Hardgrove. And then on deck is Brooke Rapport.
Thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak today. I am a ordained reverend in the Disciples of Christ. I am a mother of 2 children, one of them being a teenager under the age of 16. And speaking from my own denomination, our denomination, opposing the narrative that was just given about Christianity, has stated at our general level that we oppose all legislation that would be targeted against LGBTQ plus students, children. So to say that it is a Christian narrative is in fact wrong and does not respect the totality of Christianity. Second, regardless of the ad hominem and straw man attempts that were used to use a select pieces of information to create a narrative from an organization that has already lost a lawsuit saying that they misrepresented certain information, I think that it is important that we actually share a real narrative that's going on. I have a real concern that the person sponsoring this bill doesn't know about something that relates to his bill that happened just weeks ago. According to Project Veritas, pushing gender identity is abuse, and during the court case against SB 140, the defendants pushed that pushing gender identity was a concern. Under this bill, this would limit teachers who are mandatory reporters, would limit them from reporting whenever gender identity is being pushed on a child, even under those circumstances. So if a cisgender child is being pushed to be being transgender, they could not go to their teacher and report it because the teacher is forbidden from taking that information. So under the worries of the same senator that is proposing this bill, those worries cannot be actually reported as abuse. So this bill does not actually represent what the sponsor is even trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And on deck is Barbara Walters.
Sorry, did you say Barbara before?
No, on deck. The next, she's up next.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
First
No,
time
you're
actually
good.
being allowed up here. I was starting to think it was just for show. So it's nice to see you again, Camden. I always thought that if you said gender identity in the mirror 3 times, you show up, but I guess it's true. So here we are. Now, the chairman here was talking about how sex is a binary, and that's a funny thing because I'm intersex, and yet he's insisting that I apparently don't exist, which is really awkward since I'm right here. But well, how do you even answer to that sex is a binary where my XXY chromosomes say otherwise, that somehow it's this perversion that doesn't exist, and yet you're talking about beating your child for what your own perception of what is perverse and not perverse. And I have to ask, what is the point of this? This bill doesn't make any sense. You're talking about indoctrination in private schools, but I went to a private school. It was an Orthodox religious school. We were talking about Moses, not gender. We were talking about about God's relationship with Abraham, not sex and BDSM. And no one attached to this bill seems to be able to come up with a single example of any of this material being disseminated in a private school. Yet here we are. So I have to wonder if this is just pushing an ulterior motive or an agenda for political points in the upcoming election, or none of this bill makes sense. Even the bill sponsor attached to is contradicted the language of their own bill in this hearing. And what are we even doing here? When the sign died was months ago. All right, that's all I got.
And I do want to make a clarification. Y'all back where the microphones, y'all may not have heard it very well, but one of the presenters was not talking about his child. He was using an example. So I just want to clarify that with the audience as we keep hearing that from presenters. Thank you.
In his defense, the audience did misunderstand. He was saying if someone was the type of parent who was doing that, then the bill would not apply. If they were the type, and it does talk about maltreatment, if there was a parent like that, which is what he was talking about, then the bill would not apply. I've known Tom a long time, so I do want to clarify for everybody that we understood up here that he was not saying he would beat his child.
Thank you. Next the next speaker is Barbara Walters, and then on deck is Lisa Morgan. Okay. Doesn't appear Barbara's here. Lisa Morgan.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, she has to be out of town.
Okay. Thank you for. Oh, we've got somebody with my last name. Maya Dixon. No. Yes.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Maya Dixon. Senator Dixon, we're neighbors and constituents, or I'm your constituent. I'm a college student, and I graduated from Gwinnett County. I've always existed like this. I've been this person that wears this clothes, plays the sports I like, does the things. As much as you may hate queer people and you wish that we don't exist and that we don't exist in the classroom, creating these legislations and these policies that hurt us will not erase us. We are here whether you like it or not. And fun fact about me, I never actually came out or discovered my sexuality. The closet was built around me. I was told how to hate myself. I was told what was wrong with me, what about being queer and about presenting the way that I do and the way that I express my gender was wrong. You Christians, you policymakers who claim to love me and support me as a student and as a constituent, clearly don't. You told me what was wrong. And if you really cared about the well-being of students, you'd fix their lead-laced pipes and you'd fully fund their classrooms. You'd support students living in poverty and you'd help the holistic challenges that students and their families face. Senator Dixon, I know you may not care what I have to say, but I am your constituent and I wish that you would pass legislation that valued and supported queer students like myself rather than just trying to raise money and support for the next election. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments. Grateful for you being here, but this is not my legislation. I just chair this committee, just for clarification. Justin Pauley is up next. And then Errol Anderson is on deck.
Good morning, Chairman, committee members. I'm Justin Pauley with the Georgia School Boards Association. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. GSBA represents locally elected public school boards all over the state. Our goal today is not to debate the social or philosophical issues here because every community and school district is different. What works in one part of the state is different from what may work in another part of the state. By and large, school districts are working on these situations with families on a case-by-case basis and have been for many years. Having looked at the legislation, we do have some recommendations for consideration that address implementation. We have outlined our recommendations in the copy of the bill that was provided by Senate staff, but in the interest of time, I've brought hard copies for your consideration, and we'll also send an electronic copy as well. Chairman, with your permission, We would like to just share this information with the sponsor and the committee, and with that, I conclude my remarks. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
You can send it to me. Oh, you have it right here. Perfect.
And Errol Anderson.
I would just say her first name.
Nenekta, I may be saying that wrong. I apologize if I am. Thanks.
Good morning, Chairman Dixon and members of the committee. My name is Neka Ewulanu. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of Georgia. The ACLU of Georgia opposes SB 88 because transgender students deserve safety and equity in the classroom. SB 88 is an intrusion into First Amendment rights. The bill creates a stigma around LGBTQ topics, requiring unnecessary policies and procedures before educators can discuss the basic premise that transgender people exist. These procedures will chill educators' speech based on the speech's subject matter and exclude transgender-related topics in the classroom, resulting in a content-based restriction. And by codifying an explicit prohibition on the perspective that gender can be fluid and that assigned sex at birth can lack nuance, SB 88 also engages in viewpoint discrimination. Both content-based restrictions and viewpoint discrimination are presumptively unconstitutional under the violations of the First Amendment. SB 88 is also fatally vague. For example, the bill requires parental permission before an educator can, quote-unquote, address issues relating to transgender topics. It is unclear, however, how far this requirement would go and whether it applies to the mere mention of a transgender author, activist, or historical figure, not even to mention the experience of a transgender child in the classroom. The bill would require policies to incorporate appropriate parental involvement, but does not specify the minimum amount of parental involvement that would satisfy the requirements. SB 88 does not provide clear guidelines to municipal school boards or educators themselves to comply with the bill's requirements and is therefore impermissibly vague. Transgender students are first and foremost students. No child deserves to feel marginalized in the classroom, but SB 88 would do just that. Educators should be able to teach equitable and inclusive curriculum, but SB 88 would prohibit them from doing so. Should this legislature pass this bill, the ACLU of Georgia is committed to fighting SB 88 on all fronts. The ACLU of Georgia opposes this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Marjorie Pack is next. And then Elijah Barnett is on deck.
My name's Marjorie Pock. I use she, her pronouns. I have 2 kids in public schools. I'm opposed to SB 88. This bill starts out by saying that there's been a significant increase recently in the number of children identifying as transgender. But it never tells us why that's supposed to be a problem or why schools and teachers need to be threatened with punishment for it. I look at my teenager and his friends, many of whom are transgender, non-binary, or queer, and I don't see a problem. I see kids who are funny and smart and brave and kind and involved in all kinds of activities in their schools and communities. None of these kids learn to be transgender from a teacher, and bills like this won't stop kids from being transgender. But these bills will do other kinds of harm. SB 88 imposes extensive demands on districts and threatens schools and teachers with punishment for noncompliance. It claims to be about parents' rights, but it ignores parents like me who simply want to love and support our kids and who would like school to be a place where they're protected from bigotry rather than laid open to it. This bill would distract school professionals from more important work and erode trust between children, teachers, and parents. And by turning gender identity into a taboo subject at school, it could have the disastrous effect of isolating and silencing a child in distress. All of this harm is unnecessary. A mere increase in the number of transgender youth, while it may make some people uncomfortable and afraid, is not itself a problem that calls for punitive legislation. And it is wrong to use the law against children and teachers out of a fear of difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela Griffin.
For on deck, right?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Eliza Barnett. I recently received my master's degree in public health from Emory University, and I'm also a returned Peace Corps volunteer who focused on sexual and reproductive health and HIV prevention in Lesotho and served the U.S. in that role. I wanted to talk a little bit about the public health perspective on outcomes from this bill. We have clear evidence from decades of research that sexual and reproductive health increases health outcomes. Sexual and reproductive health education increases health outcomes for people of all ages, especially youth. And school is an important part in promoting sexual and reproductive health. Outside of just sexual health education in schools, conversations of gender can often appear in other subjects, including literature, social studies, and so on. These conversations can surround puberty, body anatomy, and even gender presentation from an individual perspective for youth in sexual health studies, but also in other subjects, especially literature. There was a discussion today of protecting gender-expansive youth from poor mental health outcomes. And for many youth, learning, just understanding what gender is and how that might relate to them can increase their mental health. So doing what by censoring the ability for teachers to engage in this type of conversation, again, we know that this type of bill can reduce mental health outcomes for youth. So finally, the truth of the matter is that through this bill, we're regulating teachers, we're not giving autonomy to youth to know their own bodies, and we're stigmatizing gender expansive identity. Please oppose this. Please do not vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela Griffin and Nicole Trenskowski, I may have said that wrong, is on deck. Is Nicole here? Then we've got Kendall Schneider. Catherine Ivy. Moving right along. Anna Theodore. Is Nanya here? You would- no? Okay. That works.
Hey, y'all. Senator Summers said that the gist of the bills is to make sure kids don't discuss identity with adults at school, and that parents need to be informed of any questioning of their gender identity, or if a child exhibits any question of their gender identity. If a parent is supportive, there's no issue. I think what we're really discussing is a right for a parent to know when they are not supportive. When a child is in an unsupportive home, which is why they would likely be suicidal or scared to begin with, if we put them in a position where we inform their parents, they will likely be more traumatized and more suicidal. Your response will likely be, well, fine, involve the authorities. It would take months, thousands of dollars, of government-funded dollars, to evaluate, inspect, and address these issues and put children into an already overburdened system for foster care and removing these children from their parents. 56% of trans youth have tried to commit suicide, not because it's a mental condition or something is wrong with them, but more because they're afraid of coming out. They're afraid of being in an unsupportive environment, and I know because I was one of them. I was born a biological boy, and I attempted suicide 4 times before I was 14. One affirming adult, any affirming adult, reduces the chance of suicide by over 40% in these children. The National Institutes for Health says that if we were to look at these statistics, 56 kids would try to commit suicide. So I'm going to break these numbers down for y'all so y'all can actually understand in children's lives. Let's take 100 students, that's 56 kids. 40% of that is 22 children's lives you can save. If you are asking to protect children, and that is your concern, I am asking you today, protect children. Save people's lives. And that's 100 children. If we're talking about thousands of children who identify as TGX across the state of Georgia, then save those lives.
Thank you so much.
My name is Feroza Syed. Not.
And then we've got Christopher and Judy Skayer.
Yep. Okay, my name is Chris Scare, and I am the father of a non-binary transgender 23-year-old. I'm at this hearing because I want to get public testimony to oppose it. Okay, I got this. I'm opposed it because SB 40 creates a special policy just for gender identity that is targeting transgender youth. Transgender youth are already very vulnerable and different, and in schools and in society make them feel that way already. Instead of stigmatizing these children and these kids, we should be lifting them up and supporting them so they can succeed in life. Plus, this is just going to give more burden to the students, to the teachers. They're already overworked. They don't need this. So I'm just here to support transgender children because if me as a parent isn't standing up here and saying this is wrong, then who is? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We've got Maya Nelson. And then Maya. And then we've got, next would be Mason Goodwin.
Hello, committee. My name is Mason Goodwin. I'm with the Georgia Youth Justice Coalition, and I'm a student at Georgia State. And I mean, after that, I'm frankly really fucking tired of showing up here for this.
Hold on one second. We're not going to use profanity in this hearing.
I'm sorry, but why is this what this body's focused on? Why did y'all get together in August for this to be the focus of this committee? Y'all are the education committee. There are other problems in our schools, mental health issues. We just got out of a pandemic. Why is this body's focus? Why? Y'all are all paid to be here, to do your jobs responsibly. This is not responsible at all, and I'm tired of being here. Everyone here is tired of being here, and I'm sorry y'all got to deal with me like this, but we're sick of it. Why? We have a 40-year-old QBE formula, 40 years old. Why aren't we looking at how we can revise that formula? Why aren't we addressing poverty? Why aren't we helping our rural schools? Why is this focus? The sponsor of this bill said last year to me and Francesca that he wouldn't do this anymore after 140. He knew what he got himself into after parents came time and time again to stop this bill as well. You've tried for 2 years. You passed divisive concepts. The person who sponsored divisive concepts in the House said the bill didn't work as intended. We don't know what we're doing with these pieces of legislation because none of you are queer. None of y'all understand the experience of students who are queer, and they should be the ones deciding the pieces of legislation that will help them. So I am begging y'all, do not go forward with this. Talk to students who do have to actually deal with these issues in the classroom, because y'all have not been in the classroom forever, and I mean that in the most respectable way. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, thank you. Next up, Jordan Black. And then on deck, Joshua Hadley, sorry.
Hi, first-time speaker. I stand as a mom. My children do not go to an elite private Christian school. They go to a regular old public school in Gwinnett County. And to my knowledge, my family is the first in our school to have a child transition in that school. And it is hard to be the first. So I read my comment with that perspective. My name is Jordan Black. My pronouns are she, her, and I stand in opposition to SB 88. This bill will impact my child's learning experience in Gwinnett County Public Elementary School by directly contributing to a learning environment where my child cannot fully express who he is. The job of local public schools in Georgia is to educate its children and keep them safe. And if Georgia teachers are unable to interact with my child in the full expression of who he is, my child will go to school feeling isolated and afraid. A recent school climate study shows that transgender and non-binary students at schools with inclusive policies are less likely to skip school or experience victimization or harassment. When you separate out a demographic, as this bill does, the result is nothing less than the dehumanization of the children this bill targets. So I ask that you stand with Georgia families like my own and against SB 88.
Before the next speaker, Senator Setzler would like to make a comment.
And I appreciate the lady's presentation. That was a professional, thoughtful, probative set of remarks, so thank you. I will say there's been some impassioned speeches up here, one in particular that's talking about how detached members of this panel are from anything that's happening in the classroom. We've got people in this panel who spent over 30 years in the classroom, spend lots of times in our schools. You know, if you're going to come here and you're going to make this impassioned speech like, hey, we're going to be this student that speaks truth to power, come here, come speak. We want to hear you. But to stand and make accusations that we're not funding education adequately. We have the highest paid teachers in the southeastern United States. We spend a higher percentage of education of our state budget on education as a state, as a percentage of our total state spending than any state in the nation. We spend more of Atlanta's resources, Metro Atlanta's wealth, funding education in rural districts than any state in the nation. We have done things for rural health care. We are funding scholarships for clinicians to go provide health care in rural areas. We are we're providing record levels of funding for folks who are in need through our state health care system, through our strategic waiver program. The folks we're not funding are single, healthy young people who can work and choose not to work. Other folks in need are being funded. So if you're going to come here in committee and speak, but do it substantively, own the facts, and if you're going to step up, let's have comments that address the issues themselves and that are factual. Don't make the impassioned plea, make generational attacks on the people on this panel, and then leave with applause. That's not what you come here for. We come here for debate. Come here, let's be engaged in debate. Let's talk substantively. I say all this to say, and I'm going to wrap up, Mr. Chairman. Let's debate this. This is a very serious bill. We've had people on both sides of this bill who've brought very substantive remarks. I thank people on both sides of the question. Let's stop making locker room speeches and let's address the facts. And I appreciate the folks on both sides who've done that.
Next up, Joshua. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Joshua Hadley, and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 88. As the parent of a transgender child, this bill would create barriers for my student to advocate for himself and his needs within the school by creating an environment where teachers and other trusted adults are uncertain about what conversations are allowable or are prohibited from having those conversations at all. We tell our children that their teenage years are preparation and practice for adulthood. Sometimes they're really bad at it, but the practice is what's important. This is a time when we should be providing more resources for our schools to support their students, not limiting what tools they can use or conversations they can have. Having an openly supportive household and school greatly reduces suicide attempts by transgender youth. Opposing this bill quite literally means that more of our children reach adulthood. I'm a person of faith. I taught my elementary Sunday school at my local Baptist church for almost a decade. We read the Bible. We taught Christ lessons of love and compassion. We extended that to all people, especially the downtrodden and marginalized. Galatians 3:28 and 29 says, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise." As Christians, we ask ourselves all the time, what would Jesus do? If we're reading the same Bible, he would oppose SB 88. Parental rights didn't matter when SB 140 was passed earlier this year. Why are we pretending that that's what this is about and that those rights matter now? Thank you.
Thank you. Sydney Germont. Carol Maddox is on deck.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jamont. I'm here today as a parent and of a child who goes to private school, which I specifically elected for her because I wanted her to have a diverse education. I really just want to echo the sentiments of everyone who's been in opposition of this bill today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol Maddox with the Georgia Interfaith Public Policy Center, and I thank the chairman and this committee for giving us time. My board is made up of faith leaders from across the state of Georgia that lead over 500,000 Georgians in their religion. And we have some concerns about the wording of this bill that I talked to our chancellor, that's like Episco speak for attorney. And in conjunction with him, we'd like to say this. It appears that the proposed changes would make to the language of this bill, which originally excluded any organizations that were run by a religion or a church. So it would now apply to religious schools, camps, and other institutions, and we think that it should not do so. Any intrusion by the state in church affairs that does not involve such matters as public safety creates all sorts of potential problems and constitutional issues. It should not be undertaken without serious consideration and only with compelling need. Telling a faith leader what he or she can say in the performance of his or her duties is something the state should not be involved with. The substitute language of the bill does not protect the rights of the religious institutions and would create enormous problems of interpretation. It would, for example, require camp staff to determine what these controversial subjects are covered or whether they're covered by the tenets of a particular denomination involved. It would require them to distinguish a tenet from a widely held belief, for example. Scholars debate the meaning of biblical passages touching on issues of sexuality, and it is impractical to require camp staffs, for example, or teachers, to figure out exactly what a faith's tenets are on these issues in order to prepare a curriculum that affects this. I am glad that the earlier speaker found a found a school that she found acceptable for her children. And I'm hopeful that she also has found a faith community that reflects her values. That is a constitutional right for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We got Kate Morgan, and then on deck is Mateo Panato.
One moment. Hi, I'm Kate Morgan, and I use she, her pronouns, and I speak in strong opposition to SB 88. As a former long-term substitute teacher and public school employee, there are many issues that plague the public school system. I actually did have a 6th grade student who was a trans boy, and I can tell you right now, trans kids are not one of them. But I can tell you about some of the real issues that we did have, because this bill actually creates issues that are not there. The biggest one was the fact that there was a lack of discipline and support from my admins. I had very little training and was inadequate because, as y'all know, we have a teacher shortage just like we did a few years ago. There was also even a school shooting threat in my classroom, and I never felt safe. And I also will note that I live in Gwinnett County, one of the best school districts in the state. Parents that agree with current practices in public schools, they are welcome to go to a private school or homeschool their children. Many people do it. And frankly, it's not my problem as a taxpayer if they don't agree with what is being taught in public schools. Because instead of wasting my tax dollars as a Georgian by creating problems that aren't there, you could actually fix real problems in education. As mentioned, this is not one of them. I will also add that there are many trans, non-binary, and LGBT people, not just in this room, but in the real world, and your kids will be interacting with them. So I think it would be better to leave trans kids alone because they are not the problem. Bills like this are the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mateo?
Mateo couldn't be here, so they let me have their time. Hey everybody, my name is Bentley Hudgens, and I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 88. Thank you for letting me be here today and giving us the time to talk to you. There's a couple things that I wanted to address. So I am the child of a public school teacher. She's retired. She taught first grade in Henry County for 30 years. My aunt is a retired teacher. My godmother's a retired teacher. I came from a family of educators, and I grew up with a lot of teachers around me, and I can tell you I never once had a teacher tell me, you know what I wish the state would do? Tell me how to do things more. The thing that I get told the most is that how they feel that they've lost the art of teaching, and that teachers are caught up in regulations and they're caught up in requirements on reporting and all this other paperwork instead of being able to actually spend time with the children that they care so much about. So I just wanted to offer that. In addition, when you talk about in this bill not only the nebulous language and the vagueness and some of the self-contradictions, I do agree with some of the points made earlier that even with you, Senator Setzler, I know we don't always agree, but the fact that the state should not be telling private schools what to do, like, we both agree on that, and especially if those are of religious backgrounds. In addition, there's just a couple things. So when we limit or require reporting, when we talk about gender or gender identity, it's not just queer gender or queer gender identity. That's not what's outlined in this bill. So we couldn't even talk about what it means to be, you know, what maybe Cardin would say or Senator Summers would say is a real man. Or we couldn't talk about even normal, quote-unquote, ideas of what manhood or womanhood looks like. So not only are you limiting discussion for queer people, you're also limiting discussion for yourself and people who believe in things like yourself. So I just wanted to point out the fact that don't cut your nose to spite your face here. We need to be very careful. Not only would you be limiting the ability to talk about gender in a thoughtful and an empathetic way, you'd also be limiting discussion to talk about it at all. And we deserve for our children to be able to have the full education they deserve, not just based on a few fringe parents who don't believe in science.
Thank you. Madeline Brown. We've got Loria Gray Clifton. And then we got Jody Braswell.
Hello. Hi, my name is Sarah Higdon, and I'm a transsexual woman, and I am here to speak in favor of SB 88. Having gone through the process of transition myself, I can tell you that it's not an easy process, and if a child is questioning their identity, then they need the help of a trained psychological professional. And it's parents' responsibilities to make sure their child gets that care, not a school teacher's. not of schools, but the parents. And the fact is, teachers are not trained therapists, so they are not exactly trained to deal with true psychological phenomenon that is sexual confusion in children. And we know this happens in schools. We know what happens in schools when they keep secrets from parents. In the most extreme cases, we have what happened to a young girl in Florida, and you can look this up. A child's gender issues were kept from the parents because of their Catholic faith, if you can believe that. That child went on to attempt suicide twice in as many days, and the parents were left in the dark that their child was even having these issues. I know from y'all's advocacy for SB 140 that y'all care about youth suicide. So my question is, why would you think it's okay to keep these children from getting the help that they need and deserve? Parents are the only ones that can do that, and unless there's clear abuse going on, which the schools then have an action that they are dictated by law to take, then it has no right to keep that life-saving treatment from parents. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anna Velasco, I may have said that wrong. I apologize if I did.
Anna can't be here today, so I'm going to speak in Anna's behalf. My name is Rachel Ward. Dang it.
Oh, okay.
I'm still going to do
Sorry, give me 1 second. All right. Hi, my name is Anna Villavasso. I'm a sophomore at Spelman College, and I am speaking on behalf of Isabella Rapaccioli, who is a Forsyth resident, and she is 15 years old. SB 88 promotes a dangerous misconception that the discussion of LGBTQ+ issues are inappropriate for young people and would pressure school boards to develop policies targeting LGBTQ+ students. The intentionally vague and confusing language in this bill would have a chilling effect on free speech, distracts school administrators from real issues, and interfere with teachers' ability to do their jobs. Parents and teachers should be able to work together to support each young person as their individual, authentic self, instead of being hampered by one-size-fits-all policies that mandate how teachers can or can't do their jobs. I firmly believe that Georgia has the potential to be a home to a generation of millions of incredibly bright and skilled young people. But what incentive do we give them to stay when we choose to even hear law after law that aims to break trust, break communities, break families, and break our children's psyches to the point of reducing them to their appearance or gender identity? To those who claim to advocate for the youth, for the children, here we are now, pleading for a classroom that welcomes love and learning and rather than hate and discrimination. If we pass this bill, we are allowing for any of the millions of children in the state of Georgia, regardless whether they identify as LGBTQ or not, to be subject to ostracization, isolation, and learning environments that encourage division and reward for youth and educators who turn on each other. These laws that continue to spring up in one way or another only prove to me that hundreds of LGBTQ youth in Georgia once more know that we simply don't belong. That in the eyes of legislators supporting this hate, I, a 15-year-old, am not a human being. Self-expression is an undeniable right to all, and we cannot legislate what we falsely deem moral and push perceptions of what a child should and should not dress like. Our classrooms and the discussions that take place within them must reflect the world around us. By pretending we do not see our differences and choosing to suppress them instead of embracing them, we are creating a generational culture that relies on ignorance and delusion as opposed to solidarity, acceptance, and collaboration. I can sincerely tell you that no one is forcing us to believe anything. No one is forcing me to believe anything. Dear legislators, please just let us feel safe in our classrooms. Let me feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sarah Riviera. Sarah.
Sorry to Anna. My name is Rachel Ward. My pronouns are they, them. I am a non-binary queer trans person, and I work for the United Church of Christ national setting. I am the Minister of Gender and Sexuality Justice Ministries, but I'm not sure that my credentials matter that much. My personhood should. I want to speak from the caliber of the Christian upbringing of which you want to have in this bill. I do have a Master of Divinity and Master of Practical Theology with honors from Columbia Theological Seminary here in Atlanta. And I want to tell you about Genesis. So Adam in the Hebrew language is Adam. Adam is a genderless being that comes into formation. I know I'm going to have a lot of faces looking at me. And that really truly what we have in the Hebrew Bible, not the Old Testament because it is the Hebrew Bible, is a simple ask of us. It is to tend to one another and the earth. to tend to one another. This bill would not tend to all. It would not create safety for trans and non-binary youth. It would continue harm in the rhetoric and uptick of violence that happens outside and within classrooms. I also want to note that my parents are both educators, retired. I was raised in the bottom of the state where there's like 4 traffic lights. If I was a kid there right now and this became law, I wouldn't be here anymore. We have a responsibility and a call. As a person who struggles with calling myself a Christian and a minister in pastoral role because of the way it gets tainted, we have a responsibility to mirror to one another the imago Dei of which we share, the God that is implanted within us when we are created, uniquely and wonderfully made. This bill does not do that. And so I'm in strong opposition. And I would also like to uplift that the UCC, United Church of Christ, has created several resolutions in the last 25 plus years condemning such rhetoric and such attempts of disembodying the personhood of God's created people, which is all of us, friends, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Nilesh.
Hello, my name is Nilesh Chakraborty. I am a Georgia Tech student studying aerospace engineering. I consider Georgia my second home. I've been here for 5 years. I love it here, right? But I've also been part of the public school system back in my home state of New Hampshire. And they also tried to pass a very similar bill, such as this one, earlier this year. And I spoke against it then, and I'm going to speak about it against it now because I care about the state and I love this state, being it my second home. So within the public school system, especially in high school, I was a queer student. I was not accepted by my family. It was hard being at home. I tried to spend as much time as I possibly could at school for that reason, because it was the only place that I felt safe. It was the only place that I felt accepted, and that was mainly due to the teachers around me who supported me, and I could talk to freely without feeling any fear or restriction upon my speech or upon their speech. They genuinely cared about me, they genuinely cared about my well-being, and they genuinely wanted to see me do well for myself. They pointed me to resources, they pointed me to counselors, they pointed me to people who could help me go through a time that was quite difficult in my life. And I could have only done that because I was allowed to have that open communication, that freedom of speech that was needed to be able to freely talk to my teachers. So a bill like this would erode that type of trust that can be fostered between teachers. It would erode that type of connection that students would be able to feel between their teachers, and it would erode a feeling of safety within a place that students should be able to feel safe. Thank you.
Crystal Mons. Crystal. Kim Siders.
Good morning. My name is Kim Siders. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you today. My child is transgender. You know, we saw this coming. I mean, we saw these examples of opposite gender expressions for years, and the toll that it took on my child not understanding or not having any language or relate to anyone else who also had these feelings. Being alone in that experience was very distressing. Being able to have conversations in the classroom with their friends and have a safe space and not be othered and not be shut down was really important for my child's mental health. I think we all know, like, we want to protect a group of people or any group, animals, right? Save the whales. What do? You educate people on the right that that group has to live unharmed by others. That's how education can protect transgender children. The witness today, the witness the senator brought to the last meeting, the last time this bill came up, clearly want to use this bill so that their child doesn't see a Trans Day of Visibility poster. It doesn't mean it's a recruiting event. It just means my child gets to live out loud and should be left alone, unharmed. They should be as free with their expression as any other child. And so I understand what the purpose of this bill is because of the witnesses the senator has brought here and the examples that they have given. They want to erase my child. They don't want to know my child exists. They don't want their child to bump into my child and know there's a transgender kid there. That's really unfair. It's really hurtful. And for a marginalized group of people, if we want to protect them, I think we tell other people that they exist, and that's okay. Nobody's trying to recruit here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Taylor Hawkins. And our final speaker is Mike Griffin. Oh, we have one more. I apologize after Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, distinguished senators. Good to see you all again. Taylor Hawkins from Frontline Policy Council. Our organization seeks to protect family and Christian values here in the state level from a biblical worldview. This bill before you seeks to address very important issues. It's critical that in Georgia we have classrooms that are focused on education, not indoctrination, and that children are able to learn and grow free from taxpayer-funded radicalism. However, we ourselves have furthered many pieces of legislation on this issue. However, this bill tries to address these issues in a way that I feel is not appropriate, that our organization cannot support. The crux is this bill, while not intending to do so, undermines parental rights in our code, accepts the indoctrination it tries to prevent, and inserts the government into private schools' ability to operate free from government coercion. When we deal with an issue like this, we have to be cautious about the methodology we use in approaching it and make sure the state doesn't do the opposite of what's intended. We've worked with multiple national and state partners on these issues for over 5 years, and in consultation with them, they've produced the counsel that I'd like to share with you today. 3 brief problems with this bill. One is that it radically rolls back the parental rights we enshrined in this body last year in 2022, changing the parent's fundamental role as primary and preeminent decision maker to one subject to what government boards deem appropriate. You'll see that in Section D. It also allows discussion of sensitive and inappropriate topics for schools as long as there is quote-unquote parental notification that such discussion took place. That is unacceptable. That's subsection C of Section D. And it points children to counselors before their parents, which suggests that government employees have the right to determine what is harmful for your child and choose on that basis to withhold sensitive information about crucial topics from parents. This too is unacceptable. Second, it is foundational to our state's recognition of parental rights that parents direct the upbringing and education of their child. This includes, very specifically, the ability of parents to contract with a private school system of their choice, free from government coercion, in order to pursue that education. We cannot clumsily shove into our code laws that would insert the government into the relationship between parents and schools, thereby infringing on parents' rights. Third and finally, the language of this bill would codify into code the idea that discussing such topics of queer theory is acceptable as long as there is parental notification and an available opt-out that's in subsection 2 of the definitions section. This is absolutely a very crucial issue. Addressing taxpayer-funded radicalism in schools is an important issue. This bill, unfortunately, does not go about addressing that. We would encourage that we table this bill for further discussion. Thank you all for your consideration.
Thank you for your comment. Mike Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Griffin. I'm the Public Affairs Representative with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board, and we're here to support Frontline Policies Council's position on opposing this bill. We are categorically in favor of the bill by way of the subject matter, and we do agree with Senator Cardin, what he is saying about the importance of parents and their rights and their responsibility to know what's going on. We don't even have to agree on these type of sexual issues to agree on the fact that it is important that parents be notified, that they have proper authority in this. So we do understand the need that the senator is seeking to address. But we too agree with Frontline Policy Council on the concern about the parents' rights issue, and it seems to be putting a little more authority on the government. We're concerned about the private school concerns being brought into this as well. The terminology acceptance, we're concerned it may go too far. And there's an inconsistent patchwork we're concerned too about this, whereas the parental rights bill covered all the state. This would only be in certain parts. So we're concerned about it and would love to work with the committee in trying to get language that would be better. And hopefully we don't have any, this is my 16th year down here, and there's always sometimes unintended consequences that happen. It's not what's meant by the bill, but it can happen. And so we definitely want to work and make sure that we don't go into those issues with it as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments. Our last speaker, Kathy Frew.
Good morning, or maybe it's afternoon by now. My name's Kathy Frew. I'm a retired school counselor. I was a school counselor in Colorado. I worked with students who were suicidal because their families did not accept their sexual orientation. So I have firsthand experience with that drama. But what I guess I really want to bring up is this underlying assumption based on the slides that were produced that children can be indoctrinated to be something they aren't. I know firsthand that many students who are transgender, LGBTQ, lesbian, whatever, know that from a very early age, and I challenge that anyone, these curriculums that were being discussed, can truly indoctrinate or change a child's feeling about themselves. In the years past, if you think about it, we have learned what dyslexia means, what it means to be autistic. There are so many different iterations of people that this is just one little piece of who a person is. And we have learned a great deal in the years past, whereas before we might say to a child or to the parents, well, they're just not very smart. Actually, they're quite intelligent. They just had a different way of learning or a different way of expressing themselves. And so I think we're on a trajectory here that we have a long ways to go to learn about how people operate, how they think of themselves. And I think we need to step back and respect everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the author like to have some closing remarks?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for having a hearing. Thank the members for coming. Thank the people in the audience participating. Once again, I'd like to reiterate, this is how we get things done. We talk about it. We don't mock each other. We don't, think bad thoughts of each other. We're here to get things done. And I want to make sure that I want to set the record straight on my issues. I hate no one. I have absolutely no hate in my heart for anyone. And to think that I'm against the trans people or the queer theory or whatever absolutely has nothing to do with this. I am not, and that's for the record. I'm not about erasing anyone. I'm not about doing any of that kind of stuff. I simply worked on authoring a bill, which, by the way, was done before SB 140. It was tabled. SB 140 came later. This bill was tabled, working for a solution to involve parents. I understand what Senator Settlers was talking about. I understand when we start going down a road, how we tell any organization what they can and can't do. I understand where you're coming from with that. I truly agree with him on that. My simple bill is, and maybe this has been morphed into something that may be a little bit broader than I'm reading in here, and everybody has a way of reading whatever they want to read into a bill. I have no problem with that. I understand that. But the reality of the bill was simply this, to get back to this, that involve parents in the discussion, and if the parents are okay with it, do what you got to do. Do what you want to do. If the parents say they want to opt out, and understand this is before the age of 16. This is not anything after that, age of consent in Georgia. That's what I tried to portray as the intent of the bill. If that's not what came across, then I sincerely think then we need to have a little more talk, a little more work on it, and obviously, we can narrow it on down. But the point is, the bill was never intended, and we reiterate, never intended to be against anyone or any person's sexual orientation whatsoever that person is. And once again, I appreciate the time of you folks. I appreciate you folks coming out, making time for your day to come out. And I'm here to answer questions. I don't run from these things. I just want parents' involvement in what goes on with their children. Simple as that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any final thoughts or questions from the committee? I see none. Thank everyone for coming out today. I know we had a lot of speakers. This meeting went on quite a while. This is a hearing only. No vote will be taken today. Thank you very much. Y'all have a good rest of your day. This meeting is adjourned.